This podcast is for mature audiences only. In this podcast, I explore stories of darkness from history, myth, and legend. I am Dennis Sarah, and this is Evil. Southampton, England, December 1979. 22-year-old Teresa Simone had been working as a part-time barmaid in the Tom Tackle pub on Commercial Road. She was employed as a full-time clerk for Southern Gas Board during the day, and she was working 2 evenings a week at the pub. Teresa had taken the part-time job to supplement her income to help pay for a Ford Escort she had just purchased. The pub was centrally located in the city, only 46 meters from the police station, and near the city's central train station. On the evening of December 4th, 1979, when her shift at the Tom Tackle pub ended at 11 p.m., Teresa and her friend Jenny Savage went to a nightclub at a nearby London road. The nightclub was a short distance from the pub, but they traveled in Jenny's car, leaving Teresa's Ford Escort in the pub's covered parking lot. Jenny and Teresa were together throughout the evening and left the nightclub around 12:30. Jenny and Teresa sat in the Tom Tackle pub parking lot chatting for a while before Teresa got in her car and drove away. Jenny was the last person to see 22-year-old Teresa Simone alive. The next morning, Mary Sadati, Teresa's mother, was concerned when she noticed Teresa had not returned home. Michael, Teresa's stepfather, drove out to Tom Tackle pub and spotted the Ford Escort in the parking lot, but he did not inspect the vehicle any closer. Shortly after 10 a.m., the owner of the Tom Tackle pub was expecting a commercial delivery. He noticed Teresa's car in the parking lot and believed she had left the car overnight. The owner needed the vehicle moved, and when he approached the Ford Escort, he discovered Teresa's partially clothed dead body in the back seat. He called the police immediately. The police investigation determined Teresa had been raped and strangled hours before. Detective Superintendent John Porter said, "It is 99% certain that the girl was murdered, attacked, chatted to, or met by her killer in a matter of seconds after Jenny Savage left her. He could have been waiting and seen Jenny leave. It is possible that he was actually sitting in Teresa's car, as we found the near side door unlocked." According to police records, when analyzing the recovered semen, it was determined the killer had to have type A or AB blood. In the year following Teresa's murder, the police interviewed about 30,000 people and took some 2,500 statements. They investigated 500 people who were in the area on that night of the murder. At one point, the list of possible suspects was about 300 men. One of those was Sean Hodgson. Sean had arrived in Southampton a few days prior to the murder. The day after Teresa was murdered, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge for auto theft. While under arrest, Sean implicated another man in Teresa's murder. However, police were able to eliminate the suspect as he had an incompatible blood type with the true murderer. In the coming months, Sean was interviewed several times about Teresa's murder and his whereabouts that night. His stories could never be verified, but the police continued to keep an eye on Sean. They knew that Sean had type A blood and a history of arrests. Sean Hodgson was described by one schoolmate as a normal teenager. Although he was placed in a Borstal at age 11, for my fellow Yanks, a Borstal was a type of youth detention center and were intended to reform young and serious delinquents. The Criminal Justice Act of 1982 abolished the Borstal system in the UK, introducing youth custody centers instead. Prior to Teresa's fateful night in 1979, Sean had numerous convictions for deception and crimes involving motor vehicles. He did have one conviction for unlawful sexual intercourse, and another for being in possession of a weapon. There's no doubt that Sean had a distressed personality. He had a history of self-harming, and he admitted to attending a clinic in 1978 after several incidents of drug overdose. Doctors assessed him as having a severe personality disorder and a compulsive liar. In May of 1980, Sean pleaded guilty to a theft in Southampton and was granted a conditional bail awaiting sentencing. In June, he was later arrested in London, and in July of 1980, he was sentenced to 3 years. During this trial, he confessed to a number of relatively minor crimes. Upon investigation, it was determined he could not have committed all of them. In fact, some of these crimes had actually occurred while Sean was in custody. In December of 1980, while in prison, Sean confessed to a priest that he was having nightmares, that the face of the woman he had killed kept coming back to him. Sean claimed that the murder had occurred in Southampton the previous year, and that he was particularly troubled because this was around the anniversary of her death. The following day, he repeated the confession to a prison officer. Sean also wrote a letter stating, "After much deliberation and thought and confession with the priest here in Wadsworth, after all the trouble I have caused, not only to you, the police, but myself, the mental torture I have gone through, the family of the person concerned, I must, for my own sanity, and the punishment I will receive for this horrible crime, I wish now that it was me that was dead, and not the person I killed at Tom Tackle Pub." In the letter, he also stated, "I did the murder. Why, I don't know. So all I can say is, let justice be done." Over the next 2 weeks, Sean offered more confessions. In Sean's confessions, he claimed to have killed a man in Covent Garden and another man in a flat in North London. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that these murders never actually took place. However, Teresa's murder did happen, and the police thought they had enough evidence to arrest Sean. He was tried for the murder at Winchester Crown Court in 1982. During the course of the 15-day trial, Sean chose not to submit to cross-examination by the prosecutors. Sean stated, "I would like to tell the members of the jury why I can't go into the witness box. It's because I'm a pathological liar. Secondly, I did not kill Teresa de Simone. Thirdly, every time I have been nicked by the police, which is on many occasions, I have made false confessions to crimes I have not committed, and this is the reason why I'm not going into the box." His defense attorney stated to the jury that Sean was a compulsive liar, and that he had confessed to 200 different crimes, including murders that in fact never happened. Prosecutors contended that Sean, under the influence of alcohol, broke into Teresa's car with the intention of stealing it, but fell asleep in the back seat. When Teresa returned to her car, she put her handbag in the back seat and it brushed against Sean. He then seized her by the back of her jumper, twisted it, and strangled her. When she was dead or dying, he then raped her. When he was finished, he fled into the scene with several of Teresa's possessions. Sean had prior arrests. He was in the general area that night with no verifiable alibi. He had the right blood type, and he confessed to the crime. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours and returned a verdict of guilty on February 5th, 1982. The judge stated, "It is a verdict with which I entirely agree. I have no doubt whatsoever that you were guilty of this appalling, horrible crime of killing that girl." Sean Hodgson was sentenced to life in prison for the killing of Teresa de Simone. 16 years later, in 1988, an inquiry was made by a solicitor to the Forensic Science Service to test the relevant exhibits associated with the murder case. For about a decade, DNA testing had become a reliable investigative process, and the solicitor wanted to check the samples in Teresa's murder case. Unfortunately, it was reported that none of the exhibits had been retained from the 16-year-old case. Also, At that time, Sean was seriously ill and in the prison hospital. Because of this, the solicitor was unable to pursue the inquiry, and it was closed. Meanwhile, Sean continued to profess his innocence. 10 years later, in March of 2008, Sean responded to an advertisement in the prison newspaper. The advertisement was placed by Julian Young and Company, a solicitor who specialized in appeals against wrongful convictions. The solicitor took Sean's case and spent 4 months attempting to track down the swab samples which had been reportedly destroyed 10 years ago. After an extensive search by the solicitors, the swabs from the original murder case were found in a forgotten storage warehouse. After testing the swabs, it was determined that Sean could not be the killer. The DNA did not match, and Sean was released from prison after 27 years. The appeals judge said it best when he said, "The decision leaves some important, unanswered questions. Perhaps the most important is that we do not know who raped and killed that dead girl. We can but hope for the sake of the appellant and the family of the murdered girl that her killer may yet be identified and brought to justice." So the case was reopened. Who killed Teresa and evaded justice for almost 3 decades? Witnesses were re-interviewed, and the investigation continued. In March of 2009, the DNA profile had been checked against the United Kingdom's national DNA database. No matches were found. Well, no exact matches. You see, blood relatives can provide a partial match, and the authorities had one such partial match. In August of 2009, authorities announced they had a suspect after testing a sibling's DNA. The killer's DNA had belonged to a man named David Lace. He had killed Teresa in 1979, and forensic science finally caught him some 30 years later. Finally, justice could be served. Or would it? In December of 1988, David, in a fit of depression, gave away his possessions and resigned from his job. He was found dead by his landlord on December 9th. The cause of his death was determined to be asphyxiation, and his death was ruled as a suicide by the coroner. David was buried on December 20th, 1988. David's body was exhumed in August of 2009, and a sample of his DNA had confirmed his connection to Teresa's murder. The killer was finally found. The most bizarre part of the story is that in 1983, 4 years after the killing, David Lace had in fact confessed to killing Teresa. In a statement to police, David said he was at the rear of the Tom Tackle pub when Teresa was dropped off that night. David approached the car and knocked on the window. He initially asked Teresa the time, but then forced his way through the driver's side door. He locked the doors to prevent her from escaping. Once inside, he assaulted her and strangled her using the passenger's seatbelt. However, in his confession, David had incorrectly described the car and Teresa's clothes. Police dismissed his statement and filed it away along with 6 other people's confessions to the crime. Sean Hodgson's legal team was never made aware of David Lace's confession. I'd like to thank Terry Griffin for their review on iTunes. Very much appreciated. If you can, review and rate us on iTunes. You can find past episodes on evilpodcast.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and SoundCloud. If you've enjoyed Evil Podcast, I encourage you to go to evilpodcast.com. There you can donate, become a patron, or buy a t-shirt. If you go to patreon.com/evilpodcast, or follow the link at evilpodcast.com, for just $1 a month, you can get the episodes early. I have a secret Facebook group just for Evil Podcast. I encourage you to just for $1 a month become a member. Any monies received go to the expenses of creating a podcast. Helps me keep the lights on, so to speak. Although technically, I do record in the dark. Feel free to contact me through evilpodcast.com with any questions or comments. And until next time, be good.